Hello and welcome to the second event in the Accounts Payable Automation video series sponsored by Perceptive Software. My name is Matt Montgomery and I am the Industry Manager for Finance and Accounting for Perceptive Software, and I will be your host today. Today's topic is Supplier Management using technology to strengthen relationships. Before I introduce our guest analyst, let me touch on a few housekeeping items. First, if you haven't done so already, we encourage you to take a few seconds to enable the group chat function within the AP Automation eDigest by clicking on the Join Group Chat button in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. This will allow you to see and collaborate with other attendees and submit questions to the presenters throughout the presentation. Second, a replay of this videocast will be available through the eDigest shortly following the live event. You can also access our previous videocast on Business Shared Service Centers, as well as preview the topics and speakers for January, February, and March. So now let me welcome and introduce our guest analyst from Forrester Research, Duncan Jones. Duncan is Vice President and Principal Analyst from serving sourcing and vendor management professionals. He is a leading expert on software pricing and licensing and helps clients understand and address the effect of technology changes on software contracts. He is also an expert on e-purchasing technologies and advises clients on their application strategy in this area, how to make good choices between alternative solution providers, and how to get the best results from implementation. Welcome, Duncan.
Well, thanks, Matt, and thanks for inviting me here to talk about this topic. So I'm going to be explaining some of the things that I've learned from talking with a number of our clients about their use of technology. And I think it's an interesting angle to think that actually this isn't all about making life tough for our suppliers and making them do things that they don't want to do. This can actually be beneficial both for us and for our suppliers. So just one second. So I'm having a little bit of trouble moving this slide. So maybe there we go. Thank you. And so Forrester Research speaks with companies about their use of technology, and we're going to be trying to tell you some of the things that we've learned, particularly in this area. This is me. Now, I think the theme for my presentation is really summarized by this picture. You're like the person on the right here trying to persuade your reluctant colleagues, the employees in your business who have to buy stuff. You want them to use your chosen technology, and I hear over and over again from clients that adoption is a big challenge. And the more you try to pull them, the more they kind of resist, like this rather overladen donkey here. And the load on top of the donkey is really the antiquated systems that many companies use, which really don't do what the users want them to do, and therefore they won't use them. So I'm going to be talking about the adoption challenge, why I think that adoption is such a problem for enterprises. Going to then describe some of the things that you can do to overcome those challenges. One is embracing the sell-side e-commerce. Another is to embrace the mobile opportunity, and then I'm going to finish with some summary recommendations. So let's start by looking at the adoption challenge. Now, really, this picture, this film theme is the CPO as this almighty, omniscient character. Many of the clients that I speak with feel that if only they could see everything that was going on in their organizations, who was buying what from whom, that they'd be able to do a wonderful job as the chief purchasing officer. But visibility is quite hard to obtain. We've been trying to get this omniscience for years, and we've implemented ERP systems, and we've built data warehouses on top of them, and we've put in other side systems, and it hasn't quite given us the omniscience that we've been looking for. So a lot of the conversations I have with clients who are looking to invest in technology in this area is really driven by this desire just to know what's going on in their organizations. Now, why is is adoption a problem for somebody trying to get this omniscience? Well, you get the resistance from these three user communities. Firstly, your internal users, the employees, they're busy people, and they want usable tools, and often the tools that they're given just don't meet that standard, so they don't want to use them. Your buyers, the skilled people in your purchasing function, many of them feel that the technology is maybe taking some of the skill out of what they're doing, or maybe it's just hampering what they're trying to achieve, or maybe it just feels like someone looking over their shoulder all the time. And then the suppliers are very suspicious of anything that the purchasing asks them to do. They think this is going to be an excuse to kind of squeeze their margin and treat them just like a commodity. So you get resistance from them as well. And if you can't overcome that resistance, then you won't get the visibility that you want. You won't get the compliance that you're after, and therefore you won't get the savings that you've been trying to drive. So why is adoption such a problem? Well, here's another film theme. The usability fight at the OK Corral. The film on the left here this is a picture of the Earp brothers, although it's spelled slightly differently in the film. And they're the old style applications that were written 10, 15 years ago. They're built for the accountants. They're built to enforce control. They really weren't built for end user employees to use, and therefore they just don't like using them. On the right hand side is a person who might be an employee in your organization who needs some stuff. Like this person here is out at a remote facility. He needs some parts in order to repair something. Maybe he needs to buy in some service to help him complete a job, and he doesn't have the time to look through a printed catalog. He doesn't have access to a PC maybe, so he just needs the goods or services as quickly as possible, as easily as possible, so he can get on and do his job. It's not because he's a bad person that's wanting to waste the company's money. It's just that he doesn't have the time. And of course, he's a mobile individual. So the mantra that I'd like you to remember is, let's make the right way easy and the wrong way hard. Too often, if people want to do what you ask them to do, we put all sorts of obstacles in their way. So we want to make life easy, and the carrot here is firstly providing a really good user experience. But secondly, we want to eliminate any needless obstacles. Over and over again, I hear clients talking about the approval chain for every requisition, that 4 people have to approve every purchase requisition, and then another 4 people have to sign off every purchase order. That just takes too long. If you can't turn a requisition into an order that a supplier is acting on within 24 hours, then you're taking too long, and people just won't use your system. So you have to really be ruthless and get rid of the approval, so you don't you don't saddle your donkey with that heavy burden. On the other hand, you also want to reward them if they do the right thing. So you can have some gamification, some bonuses if people are doing a high proportion of their transactions through the proper process with approved suppliers. Now, the converse of this is making the wrong way hard. And too often, it's just too easy to ring up a supplier, give them some made-up purchase number. Maybe we let them have P cards and things like that, and then they can just sign off the invoice when it comes in. It's really just too easy to do purchasing the wrong way. So we have to put obstacles in place, and that means maybe counseling some employees about what they're doing wrong. Maybe it means some obstacles in the way of suppliers that no, you won't get paid, or you won't get paid as quickly if you don't have a proper purchase order that came through the proper system. So those are all things that we can do to make the wrong way hard. Now, part of making the right way easy is embracing sell-side commerce. Now, Forrester Research does a lot of research into the sell side. A lot of our clients are spending a lot of money to improve their sell-side technology, their websites, for helping their customers, your employees, buy the goods and services that they need. And really, my advice is you've got this usability corral that you're trying to keep people inside. Maybe you should be a little bit more relaxed about letting them escape, letting them use the great wealth of technology that's out there in the sell side. I'm going to give you an example here. Here's a sell side site. This is a B2C site, but it could also be used in a B2B context. And it's just a good example of some of the things that you just take for granted when you're using a website. Look, we've got here some filters. So I've just done a search for maybe printer, and I've got a number of different items. And here on the screen, I can filter it by price. I can look at peer reviews. I can pick 3 or 4 and compare them next to each other. And if I'm having any trouble, on the right-hand side, I've got something nice like a live chat where I can talk to someone in a call center who can help me find the thing that I'm looking for. That's the sort of basic capability that I'm going to demand from my buy-side sites. So if you're putting in an e-procurement product and it doesn't have all of these, you're making the right way hard for me. You're making it harder for me to find the things that I really want. The risk is if you let people just go out and shop on the internet and use all these great sell-side sites, they're doing some things that you don't want them to do. The same site here is driving all this impulse buying, things called upselling and cross-selling. Companies know that if they can attract buyers to their sell-side sites, they can increase the transaction value by 30% or more. And in procurement, we don't want that. In fact, we want the opposite. We want the site to be driving people to spend less money to buy cheaper goods, something that I call down buying, which is the opposite of upselling. So this table here summarizes the different perspectives of the seller in this e-commerce transaction and the buyer, i.e. procurement, the official buyer. And then the employee, that's me, an individual wanting some goods or services. I'm kind of caught in the middle between these two different constituencies, the buy side and the sell side. And if I'm not getting what I want, I'm more likely to go with the seller's site, unless you can prevent me by making your experience as good as what I can get just shopping on the internet. Now, one way to resolve this dilemma, this conflict, if you like, is to work with suppliers to let them use their sell-side technology, but put some controls in place. Make them enforce your policies in the employee's buying transaction. And travel sites are a good example of where this works. A lot of suppliers would say, well, why on earth would I want to support down buying? Why would I want to help my customers spend less with me rather than more? And the answer is because your customers' procurement departments won't let their employees use your sites unless you do this. And the travel sites know this, so they almost all of them have ways for you to define your policies, and they'll enforce them. And so here's an example. I wanted to travel between 2 destinations in Europe. I had some particular requirements about when I left and when I arrived, and it's giving me the cheapest option that met my requirements, but it's also suggested something that's slightly cheaper. I can save 50 or 60 pounds if I just would arrive a little bit later. And then it's giving me some options. So maybe I want to fly business class. I at least want to know how much extra it's going to be to fly business class. So if I can justify it, or if the client is paying for it and the client's happy with it, then I could go for that option. So that it's not just sort of rigidly enforcing a policy. It's not letting me get to the end and right at the shopping cart stage saying, no, we're not going to let you have that. It's helping me all the time in the transaction do what I want to do. So it's certainly our conclusion in Forrester that because of the amount of investment that's going in sell-side sites and how far ahead they are of the buy-side procurement tools in terms of usability, that the sell-side sites are going to win this usability fight. And therefore, you should really embrace them. Don't fight them. Don't try and keep your horses inside the corral. You'll never do it. But don't give up and say, well, okay, then just have open shopping on the internet and let anarchy rule. We can use punch-out extensively. So let's at least start within our control framework, make sure that the shopping cart will have an approval process. Let's try and get as big a portfolio of punch-out suppliers as we possibly can. Let's actually talk to suppliers about what they can support and favor the ones who have the good technology, who will apply our policies, not just the cheapest suppliers, but the ones who really are using technology best, and the ones that will help our employees save money. And then really, once you've found some good suppliers, make sure that you integrate your systems in with theirs so that the ordering process is streamlined. They're going to be reacting as quickly as possible to your orders. And then also that when they invoice you, that invoices are coming in automatically into your system, either because they're keyed in by the supplier or because they're fed automatically from their system or whatever capture method. We want to have a really streamlined process from their system into our system, automatic approval by our system, and prompt payment. I think that's really important, that if we reward the good suppliers with prompt payment, then that's making the right way easy. It makes them the first line of defense, because when some of our bad employees ring them up and try to order stuff by phone without an approved purchase order, the supplier is going to say, no, I can't do that because I'm going to have trouble getting paid. So this is part of this theme of making the right way easy and the wrong way hard. Now, when it comes to connection with suppliers, not everybody has the same level of capability. So I would urge you to support multiple connection methods. Obviously, the ideal is some sort of electronic transmission method where the data comes out of their system and into our system without any manual intervention whatsoever. But if they aren't willing or able to support that, it's perfectly okay for suppliers to be asked to key transactions into a portal, or to maybe, as a last resort, send them to a scanning center where they can be parsed automatically or maybe keyed in by human beings, whatever works for the supplier. Last point here on this slide is that there are a number of ways of sending the information electronically via supplier networks, via traditional EDI, via email even. It's my advice to buyers that they should support multiple methods. If you give suppliers the choice as to which method works for them, you're minimizing the adoption barrier. If you pick a supplier and insist that they use that one, then maybe that's making it harder for them. Maybe there's extra costs for them to use that service or connect to it, and that's going to lead to the risk of resistance. So support more than one network. It's a bit more work for you to connect multiple networks to your system, but it's not rocket science. It's not that difficult, and so I would urge you to do that. Now let's talk about the mobile opportunity. Really, mobile has an opportunity to revolutionize the way procurement processes work. And I give a couple examples on the slide here. We've got this person I talked about earlier who's actually requisitioning stuff. He's saying, I need some goods or I need some services. The mobile apps for him have to be really smart. They have to be context aware. That is, they need to know what he's trying to do, where he is. They need to help him find the things that he wants. They want to be really focused on a particular task. So whereas PC user interfaces are often allow us to do multiple different things like check status or search through catalogs or look approve requisitions, in a mobile app it's one thing at a time. Increasingly, we're going to see them making use of mobile phone features like photo recognition or voice recognition. I have this vision of just getting my phone and being able to speak into it and saying, I need 5 more widgets like the one I bought last week, and the phone and the software behind it at our server will be able to work out what I mean. The sell side sites are all working on stuff like that. When we look at the approval side, the great thing about mobile is it gives us an opportunity to have a very much faster response. Wherever I am as a manager, I can get a notification, I can have a quick look at it and approve it. But that's also the danger of mobile on the approval side. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about approval in a minute, but just let's look at this shift, this what Forrester calls the mobile mind shift. Really, when we look at e-procurement technology on the market today, it's really just one step up from the printed catalog. Okay, the catalog's online, but it's still static content, still searching through some search results. You can't do that on the phone. You can't give people 50 search results and get them flicking through on their phone until they find the one they want. That just doesn't work in the form factor. So the mobile mind shift on the right-hand side here is a completely different way of finding the goods and services that we want. As I say, with photo recognition and voice recognition. Now, the mobile mind shift on the approval is to recognize that most approval on mobile is serving little or no control value. I know a lot of companies tell me that most of their invoices are approved by mobile phones, but I would suggest that most of them, the managers who are approving them, aren't really looking at them with the diligence that we expect. So the speed and the immediacy has this downside that it's what I'm calling a blind approval. We're giving an incomplete view of the transaction. We're not given enough information in order to make an informed decision. And we're not even asked what decision we're really being asked to rule on. We're just given a big button to press because that'll make the accountants happy. That'll look like a valid control, when in reality, it's providing no control value whatsoever. The mobile mind shift on approval is to say that the system has to do as much as possible. We need business rules in the software that check everything about budget limits and is it the right supplier, all that sort of thing. Here's an example of a mobile approval app from an e-procurement vendor. Yeah, it looks rather nice, pretty colored buttons and all that, but it's providing no valid control value because it doesn't tell me what I'm being asked to approve. It doesn't tell me enough about the item. It doesn't tell me what the problem is. Why have you given me this? Is it because it's the wrong supplier? Is it because it's over budget? Is it because it's a more expensive item than we usually buy? I have no idea. It's just asking me to press a button for no apparent reason. No, mobile approval forces us to do what we should have done anyway, which is to redesign the approval process. So that means eliminating superfluous approval levels, redundant box ticking by managers. We want to automate as much of the validation as possible. Let's ask the managers, when you look at this transaction, what sort of things you are actually checking? Well, let's take that knowledge, turn it into business rules that will apply automatically on your behalf, and we'll only give you something to approve if it's an exception to one of those business rules. Another step here is to say, actually, let's live without purchase orders. Sometimes they're just not appropriate. For certain sorts of goods and services, they're not really doing much job. A lot of people raise a lot of purchase orders after the invoices come in, which is pointless. So let's find other ways to vouch invoices. Let's look at contracts, timesheets, other things like that. And lastly, let's make sure when we do ask someone to approve something that's likely to be a mobile approval, let's make sure we focus them on the question that we're asking. Let's really flag the exception and make it clear what aspect of the transaction we're asking them to look at. Excuse me. So I'll finish with some summary recommendations here. If you're just starting down this journey, maybe you don't have any procurement technology, or the product that you've got is really very poorly used, then you probably want to look at getting another provider, maybe upgrading to the existing provider's latest product, or just starting again from scratch. So my recommendation there is to look at the alternatives from the point of view of adoption. Don't look at it from the procurement, the purchasers angle so much, because you can kind of control your people. It's the employees out there who need to buy stuff. How can you make sure that their life is as easy as possible? And the suppliers, how can you make sure that their life is as easy as possible as well? Because that's going to get you the adoption. Make sure that the procurement tool can really embrace the sell side. So we want punch out, of course. We want extensive use of punch out, but also we want the ability to have people shopping out there in the internet and bringing those transactions into the official process, some way of maybe capturing orders on hold and getting them approved before they're released. And then the last point, as I said before, is really be ruthless in redesigning the approval for the mobile era, minimum of manual approval steps. Then if you're further along, maybe you can, you've got good use of the tool in certain areas, certain business units or certain categories, get more data on the process, find out who's causing the problem. Is it certain types of items? Is it certain categories? Is it certain individuals? Go and speak to them and say, look, how can we make the right way easy and the wrong way hard? It's all about getting the kind of excuses from them and saying, well, okay, what if we did certain changes to the process? What could we do so that you would actually use our tool? And then the last point here is really focus much more on analyzing the transactions and shifting more and more of your manual approvals to exception reporting, and treating it more as a sort of man management issue than an inline box ticking issue. So, Matt, I hope that gives everyone a good feel for why so many of them have an adoption challenge and some of the things that they can do to address those challenges.
Oh, great, Duncan. I appreciated it. And just to remind everyone, if you haven't done so already, I encourage you to ask Duncan or I questions by enabling the group chat function within the AP Automation eDigest. You'll see the Join Group Chat button in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, and this will allow you to ask questions of us as we go. But before I get into my part of the presentation, Duncan, there was a question I think for you that's interesting, is that one user asked if they're a regional office of a very large global company and they're allowed to engage with local suppliers for certain items, but unfortunately those suppliers can't necessarily afford to adopt e-purchasing technology. How do they sort of work together with the corporate office to make sure that they're staying compliant and doing the right thing, but still able to not be isolated from them in terms of broad technology and policy decisions? Right.
Right. Yeah, that's it. That is sometimes difficult, but the technology is improving so much, Matt, that these days it's really not a valid excuse for a company to say, no, we can't play in this game. There are a number of ways that the supplier can connect. And the most basic is via some sort of portal that you provide them, that they can manually download orders and manually upload or key in invoices. But you can also have technologies that can strip out information from emails, for example. So maybe you can at least send them a purchase order via an email. They can handle that manually, and maybe they can send their invoices to you via email if you have some technology that can strip out the attachment and parse out the data from the PDF or whatever. So I don't think it's a valid excuse. I mean, cost, that's an issue. That's partly why I say give them a choice of methods. Don't force them to use a method that might be expensive, but recognize that if they're serious, more and more of their customers are going to be asking for them to support some sort of e-commerce transaction.
Okay, no, thank you. So, Anne, if you could help me here and get this into a presentation mode, what I wanted to talk a little bit about and to give you some background as to what I have done. So I am the industry manager for finance and accounting for Perceptive Software, but I came from where for Lexmark International, I was the procure-to-pay operations manager for globally, as well as managed North America sourcing. And so as we started to go through a process of implementing e-procurement solutions, as we started to drive differences in supplier behavior, there were lots of things that we had to go through. And I'm going to break this down into a couple different topics here. So, and I can't see the slides progress, but if you could get me to the next slide. So as we start thinking about the process for us, what Perceptive really does is Perceptive will take and help automate solutions. We'll go through and look at the, how do we take really hard problems and make them so that they can be automated as best possible. So how do we start to put these processes, get them to go as quickly as possible? And so we start thinking about how we can talk to looking at those business processes, thinking about the user, thinking about the experience of the user, thinking about the supplier. How do we make all of the things that Duncan talked about run as efficiently as possible? So when I think about the user, to get us started here, I think that what we want to talk about with them is how do we do, as Duncan said, he calls it a donkey. I call my users, it's like water. They're going to find the path of least resistance, but there's nothing stopping them, and they're always going to be coming. And how do we start to look at some of the things that we want them to do? And we want them to really understand how do we drive that better communication, that compliance, the things we want from them. So how do we get them involved in the process? And so we will talk through that with them and make sure that they understand what is it about what they want to do that still accomplishes our objectives. So as we think about what they're trying to do with implementing a system, is they don't want to have to learn a new system. They have no interest in doing that. They're trying to get their project accomplished, and they're trying to get their project accomplished in the most efficient manner. Purchasing is not their priority. So as we work through that with them, how do we make something relatively easier? So we want to make sure that they understand what is the savings impact of why we're doing what we're doing. So as we look at things like, we know that they're getting a discount, but if they feel that they can't trust us and they're going to get a better discount somewhere else, they will go to another solution. So we want to show them, and Duncan showed the travel example. That's a great one that we all sort of understand, is that when you look at the content, what's available on the website, you look at the pricing that's there, is there something else that they could be doing that would get them a better price somewhere else? So as Duncan talked about the punch outs being really important, they want to trust the pricing that they're seeing, so they're not even interested in searching somewhere else. It's easier for them to interact through the system that we're providing for them. Now, some of the things that will get very complicated in what we're trying to do then is what happens when we get out of that I'm buying a good conversation to where I'm buying a service, and where a good will have a catalog and a good will have a something that has a very distinct unit of measure, have a very distinct pricing associated with that. That gets very difficult when we get into things that we may think of as I'm buying a milestone-based project effort funded by consulting that has components of travel and maybe components of hardware, other things that I'm lumping together. So we still want to be able to take that and make sure that we are working with that user in understanding that journey that they're going on and remove a lot of the barriers that are there. The other thing that we want to think about are how can we share some of the other objectives of the organization around what we may be trying to accomplish, and how do we get them engaged in that? And one of the areas that's also easy to understand is diversity. So as we talk about some of the things that we're trying to accomplish to help us win, for example, U.S. government contracts, as we think about some of the things that we're trying to go through to drive better sales, some of the things we're being asked in the RFPs and the RFQs are how are we doing with diversity? And we can market that with the users to help them understand that we've selected this vendor because it's a part of our overall program. They're providing the same level of service, the same level of turnaround, but it helps us sort of build the business case for what we're trying to do in sales and drive sales. And what I found is we were talking through these and driving additional compliance activities, is that in doing that, we were able then to go through and get users on board with us. And then it wasn't as much of a fight. It wasn't us pulling the donkey from Duncan's example. It was much more about, okay, let's get this, let's get engaged, and let's help us go a lot faster. But we start looking at that internal marketing as a really important aspect of what it is. What I have found, whether you're talking about travel or you're talking about purchasing compliance, as much as you can get the information out to folks and make them feel like they are a part of the process, then they are much more engaged and willing to work with you. But that becomes our real struggle, is just making sure that they understand what's happening. And Duncan touched on this as well. When we talk about making the easy and the hard, the non-compliant hard, we really have to think about that approval process. And Duncan, I love what you talked about in terms of what's really happening in the mobile approval process. And I know we had an example of the travel approvals. For a long time, we did trip pre-approval. And what that really meant as we were going through it was that late on a Friday afternoon, we were chasing people down. And once we got a hold of them, they were clicking the approve button. And it was this 95+% of things that got approved anyway, but we were asking them to click a button that really, to your point, didn't add any value at all. It just, we followed a process that was great for our audit team to show that we had control. And we see a lot of that in some of the purchasing activities. So when we looked at the analysis of where was our spend based on the number of transactions, and we looked at things and realized that about 2/3 of the transactions made up less than 1% of our spend, what's the real value in that 2/3 of effort? So we set clip levels based on what we understand is material to our business, and we get out of the way of the things that need to happen. I was talking to a company in the hospitality industry, and they had different things about the commodities that also made sense, which was, they have a hotel, they have restaurants in their hotel, and if the restaurant runs out of food, it can't wait for a PO to be processed. So what are your choices? Either they're maverick spend, or you make it easy for them to spend within compliance. So we talked about setting up the approval where food is essentially pre-approved. But we want to do that in a mechanism where we have the visibility to the information, and we can go through the exercise of understanding what that spend is. They're working with these suppliers that are already set up. So we've got all of the controls and the leverage spend that we want, but we've enabled that for the users so they can expedite as they need it. And I think that ends up being incredibly important. And then if we think about that from then the supplier side, we have to think about the communication that's happening with them and what is our objective with the supplier. And our objective really is to say, as much as we can have a better relationship with them and lower pricing, and total cost is incredibly important, because as we become a better supplier-customer relationship, as we do that, the total costs and some of the hidden costs go away. I've had lots of situations and lots of conversations where folks have talked about, okay, you made me go through a certain process that had these additional fees for me to do business with you. They may not show up in year one, but a lot of times they show up in year two in future pricing. Or if you do things where you pay them late consistently, or it's not predictable on when you're going to pay them because of that invoice PO relationship is sort of fuzzy, then that is something else where they're either going to raise their prices, lower their level of service, but they're going to do the things that help them recover the total cost. And then when we talk about the other things that are happening within that communication is you probably have lots of staff to try to cover all of the firefighting that you have to do, whether that's looking up the information as to when an invoice is set to be paid, or it's just firefighting when something didn't get paid because the invoice sat on someone's desk or didn't get processed or didn't get applied correctly, and you have to react in a very fast manner to get them paid because they're stopping shipment and a production line's going down or electricity is being turned off and all of those wonderful things that suppliers can do to get themselves paid. So we talked then about, as we look at putting in these programs or these processes, is how really big is this problem? So if I look at the cost of the engagement and saying, okay, what am I spending today from a resource perspective? What am I spending today from a technology perspective? But then what am I missing out on? And in understanding the whole process, we look at everything there. So if I'm pushing pricing down to the suppliers, please believe that the suppliers will push that cost back to us. So you want to be really careful that it is a high value activity for the supplier to work electronically, not just for you, because you'll start to see those prices again. And then we talk a lot about how do we solve that problem then, and the visibility that we want to give. And I'm going to talk in a second about some of the different types of communication just to think about. But I would also ask, as you're thinking about that, how do you work in your operations? And there's this idea of pull versus push communication. So I've talked to different companies that they've talked about, with supplier portals and sharing the information. Suppliers don't want to have to log into another system generally. They've got other things that they want to do. They don't want to remember the links. They don't want to necessarily remember username and passwords. They want to make that easy. What they really want is just that they know when you're going to pay them. They know that you've received the invoice. They know what's happening in a predictable manner so that they can act appropriately. And so if you're telling them that in a push manner of saying, whether it's as simple as an email saying, yes, I've received your invoice and this has been fully approved and it's set to be paid. If you've got simpler solutions there, just understand what's the balance of the cost of the overall technology for the Cadillac solution versus where you might have simpler solutions that really do hit the supplier's objective. And then as we think about overall the communication that happens within procure to pay, a lot of times what gets thought about then is just that transactional communication. So as we get started there with that transactional communication for procure to pay, most people think of the purchase order going out maybe to the supplier receives it, and then it goes back and the supplier will communicate an invoice back. But there is a lot of other communication that can happen there that becomes relatively interesting. So as much as you receive the invoices and come back, the supplier is very interested to say, did you receive that invoice? And has that invoice been approved, for example? Because if they don't know that information, they don't know that they need to follow up. They don't know that if they need to react, if there's something else that they need to do to go hit an issue before it comes to the end of that payment term and they just realize that they hadn't been paid. So there's lots of things that you want to also think about. What else do you want to know from the supplier? If it's a good, do you want to have a shipping confirmation built into what you're doing? Is there a receipt step that you want to build into it? Is there things around if there's other people that are doing the confirmation of the good or the service? Do you want that communicated out to the supplier so they can follow up and they can work with your buyer before it comes to AP? But there are lots of things that you want to do within that transaction communication so that you can make sure that you've got that complete relationship. Because you've got this opportunity where you've captured their attention, you can have a much more robust conversation. And then other things to think about while you have them there in terms of areas where it's driving that cost and trying to get to compliance is things. So the first one is supplier data. How much are you going to let them manage their own information? Are you going to let them manage their own banking detail, for example? Or to update contact information, email addresses and whatnot? Do you want them to be part of that process to reduce the sort of the delays and the interactions in that communication? Do you want them enabled for the bidding processes, whether it's an RFP or an RFQ, and be plugged into your system? And how much does that actually translate all the way over into contracts and purchase orders? And is that something that's real that you do in a common area? Catalog management, as Duncan talked about, I think is interesting as we think about how do they maintain pricing and how much do you lock in a price for a period of time, or how much is that a discount over shelf, and how much do you control a lot of the parts? And I think that is something, as much as you're engaged together, is another one that you want to make sure that is very clear for you. The example I use is software there, where we would have from the catalog all sorts of different, for example, Microsoft Office licenses, but there's so many different options, whether there's volume discounts or versions. And at a corporation, you might be stuck on a version, and you want them just to buy the corporate approved version. So you don't necessarily want to show the other versions to everyone. But then there might be some folks like IT architects that need to see and have an expanded version of that catalog. You want to have a detailed conversation with the supplier to make sure they understand that. And then sort of tying all of those together is how well are you working in that communication? And you want to make sure as you're working with the supplier that you understand their performance, especially from a procure-to-pay perspective of we're showing that we're paying 100% on time, but the supplier is showing that you never pay on time. What's that disconnect? So that we actually have metrics around that to make sure that everything's clear. And what I've uncovered in those conversations are the supplier thought we had 30-day terms, but in our contract, we had 60-day terms. And so we have to get an alignment as to what those are to reset expectations so that we don't have this finger pointing as we go. But I think that this is a really powerful message as we think about the technologies. I think, Duncan, you did a great job as we started talking about that process of treating them like, pulling a donkey, I say like water, and making people think about what is easiest for them as they go forward. What is easiest for them is they need to do the processes that are most compliant and most beneficial to the corporation, but in their own best interests. And so with that, I'd like to open up some of the questions that we've gotten on the floor. And if you want to move it ahead for me. And then let me ask a couple of things that have come in. And again, use the join group chat button, and you can ask your questions there. But Duncan, this first one's for you. It says, Duncan, in your experience, what negotiation strategies work best to get better pricing on software license and maintenance agreements? And the second part of that would be, where is our leverage, and how do we make sure we're getting good value?
Well, that's a really deep question, I think. That's a little bit off topic. I think generally with negotiation with a supplier, you need to have an understanding of what a win looks like for the other party. What are they trying to get out of the deal? And you have your own goals, but you're always looking to find the supplier's goals that are worth more to them than they cost you to grant. And so maybe it's something like making them a sole source in a particular category, or an approved source, or just giving them some lead in selling to elsewhere in your organization. There are lots of things that a supplier might be looking for that really it doesn't cost you very much to give. And then in return, you're looking for things like discounts. Maybe there are some things that you want to get particularly. You want to get a streamlined process. you really want to get them dealing with you electronically, and it doesn't actually come out of the salesperson's pocket if he says yes to that. So that's the sort of concession that maybe you can get. So I would summarize it by saying look for the win-wins.
Sure. Another one from the audience here, but I'll take it first, and I'll hand it over to you to sort of expand. And please comment on how to communicate with business users versus suppliers. Should it come from accounting or purchasing or the heads of the business units? And then just wondering how changes in policy process or how to make them as palatable as possible. For us, what we were doing was much more about having that executive communication coming from the right group. So as we talk about diversity, we want diversity to come from, whether that's an internal executive that's sort of sponsoring that program within the organization. And we would also have a joint message from the sales team to sort of talk about how that's important. As we talk about more things around compliance aspects, that was coming more from a CFO perspective in driving those out. But we tried to get as high an executive as possible to communicate it out so that it would get attention if it's in a grand scale. For the individual non-compliance items, that's definitely handled at a lower level. And we do try to do a little bit of a scorecard anyway as to how different business groups are doing. But Duncan, do you want to respond on your thoughts there?
Yeah, there's a couple of aspects to that question. It's a really good question. I think the first thing is how do we actually manage the communication with suppliers and also with our employees? You mentioned it before, Matt, about marketing to them. I actually encourage clients to find someone in their marketing department who focus on the selling activities and borrow them for your project. Even borrow the technology they use to control marketing activities like email blasts and phone follow-ups and who's opened an email and who's responded to it and who's clicked on the website to have a look. And all that sort of stuff should be part of the marketing program. And often companies, they have that as core skills. They have people who know how to do that and do that all the time. And yet, of course, in purchasing, they're just not aware of it. So go to the marketing people, ask them for help to really run it as if it was a formal marketing campaign. Now, the other part of that question, which I really liked, was, okay, who should sign the letter? Who should sign the email? And that really depends on who the supplier thinks of as its customer. If you're a central category manager, you might feel that you're the person who makes the sourcing decision, but actually the supplier thinks of the local country manager or the local business unit head as the customer. I mean, for example, if in retail there's this, they might think of the store manager as the customer. In many ways, the store manager is the one who decides who to use at the end of the day. They may choose the supplier that the center has picked, or they may not. So I think you have to work out who at the moment does the supplier think of as its customer. And if in general it's dealing at a local level with local business unit managers, then that's who should sign the letter. If you do it as a central edict and you say, right, now we're in control, and this is going to happen, and this is the way it's going to be, and no PO, no pay, that sort of policy. Well, that's fine, but you need the local people to back it up. So you need to get them on side first, the store managers, the branch managers, the local MDs, so that if the supplier rings them up and says, well, is this really true or not? You want to be sure that they're going to say, yep, it's absolutely true. We do want we do want you to comply with this policy. But if you've got any problems at all, complying with it, here's the people you have to go to. And that's when you get into the kind of the selling part. You start off with the marketing, then you get into the selling, and then you close the deal where they're actually using your portal or sending in their invoices electronically.
Another one, if you want to take it, and then I'll add, I think, is we talk a little bit, or you talk a little bit about redesigning the approval process. What are considerations or things that you've done for making sure that you've got a good, solid approval process to make this as easy for everyone as possible?
Well, I like what you said, Matt, about looking where are the risks, where's the spend value, where's the effort going in, and often the accountants, I speak as a qualified accountant, so I've done auditing. I know how these things work. We focused on was the policy being followed rather than is it a sensible policy. And your example of the travel is a good one. I've seen the cases where people weren't able to spend $100 to go and visit a customer who desperately needed help because the travel policy required certain approvals and those people weren't available in time. That just doesn't make sense. The focus has to be on selling to customers and serving customers. So we look at the money and we say, is there another way that we can do this? Is it okay? Is there a way that we can empower individuals but spot people who are doing the wrong thing some other way? If somebody's used up their travel budget, they've gone over a certain amount in a short space of time, we want to step in and see what's going on and seeing if they're being insufficiently frugal. Your example of the hotel is another good one. Fraud goes on in that sort of business. We know that, but we can't prevent it by looking at every invoice. If they're pinching food and selling it in the local market, we're not going to spot that by looking at their invoices. We're going to spot that by looking at the overall reports of what they've spent on certain commodities and comparing that with the revenue and the margins and that sort of thing. So I would say really focus on what control can we put in by exception reports and analytics, and only have human beings doing it if it's really something that we can't find a way to put into the system.
Sure. And I know for us, one of the big challenges was just making sure that you understand what your approval process currently is and where bottlenecks are. And so, we applied using some of the Perceptive software anywhere, just to look at what is some of the process that's being modeled and where are things getting stuck. And then where can we make sure that where processes need to evolve, we're able to make that as easy as possible. And we definitely have struggled when we've gone down a path where an ERP or something locks you into a certain approval flow that it's not easy to go change. And we want to make sure that it's very much easy for us to go through the adjusting and evolving that approval flow as we go. And I think you've definitely given me some interesting things to think about from a mobile perspective as well as we take these through to the next step. But we have run out of time. Duncan, this has been absolutely wonderful. And I just want to thank you for your time and sharing your expertise on sourcing and vendor management. And I would say to everyone, please mark your calendars for our next video cast. It's going to be after the holidays, after everyone is fat and happy. But the next session is Evolving Shared Service Centers. It's a focus on organizational and process agility, and it's on January 22nd at 11 a.m. Central. So I look forward to it, and thank you, Duncan, and thank you, everyone, for your time.
Thank you. You're welcome.